My name is Xavier Banks, and until recently, my life was predictable in the best possible way. I'm a software engineer, a creature of habit, and I deliberately chose my suburban neighborhood for its quiet, orderly existence. The houses were neatly spaced, the lawns manicured with almost militant precision, and the air, generally speaking, was free of the cacophony of city life. Generally enjoying the fruits of my labor in tranquil solitude, little did I know that my haven of peace was about to be invaded by a one-woman wrecking crew, disguised as the president of the Homeowners Association, Karen Whitmore, and, as I soon discovered, a uniquely talented driver of destruction. She lived next door, a fact I initially considered innocuous, even beneficial. After all, being on good terms with the HOA president seemed like a prudent move. I quickly learned, however, that good terms was not in Karen's vocabulary unless it involved unquestioning obedience to her whims. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Small scratches began appearing on the trim of my garage door. I initially dismissed them as the price of yard work. The occasional runaway rock from my mower, or perhaps a careless delivery driver. I even went as far as to feel bad about having scratched the paint on my garage door. I thought to myself that I should be more careful while doing lawn work around the property. However, the scratches started to increase in both frequency and severity. Then came the dents. More substantial damage, enough to be noticeable even from a distance. I couldn't explain how rocks from the mower would cause a dent on the garage door. I began to suspect something more insidious, something requiring closer investigation. I considered installing security cameras, but initially dismissed the idea. It felt overly dramatic, a sign that I was becoming paranoid. But the mounting evidence, the escalating damage, forced me to reconsider. I did eventually install a security camera. It was a simple Ring doorbell camera. At the time, I thought it would be enough, but I was wrong. I never could have predicted the sheer audacity of my neighbor, the brazen disregard she held for my property, and ultimately for me. I had just got the Ring doorbell set up, and I watched the live feed one morning as I was leaving for work. That was the morning that my suspicions were validated, my peaceful suburban existence shattered. The Ring camera footage was undeniable. Clear, crisp, and damning. There it was, Karen Whitmore, backing her silver Lexus out of her driveway. Her driveway, I should point out, was significantly wider than it needed to be, easily accommodating her vehicle with room to spare. Yet her maneuver was anything but graceful. It was jerky, hesitant, and ultimately disastrous. She backed out at an angle, eyes darting everywhere but at her surroundings. Then, with a sickening crunch, her bumper connected with the corner of my garage door. No mere graze, no accidental brush, a full-on collision. The video clearly showed the moment of impact, the audible thud, and the visible wobble of my garage door. But what happened next was even more infuriating. Karen paused for a fraction of a second, seemingly assessing the damage, her gaze flitting towards the camera. Then, with a nonchalant shrug, she accelerated, leaving the scene as if nothing had happened. No note, no apology, no attempt to take responsibility. Just a quick glance and a swift departure. My blood boiled. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of negligence, a blatant display of disrespect. The video footage was clear, but she drove away as if nothing happened. I replayed the video several times, each viewing intensifying my anger. The audacity of this woman. I felt helpless, and I knew I had to do something. I decided to confront her that very weekend. I chose my words carefully, striving for politeness and reason. I approached her outside her house, attempting to keep my tone neutral and calm. "Karen?" I began. "I wanted to talk to you about something. I've noticed some damage to my garage door, and my Ring camera caught you while backing into it the other day." I even showed her the video on my phone, hoping that visual evidence would elicit some semblance of remorse. I expected an apology, an explanation, perhaps even an offer to cover the repairs. But what I received was far worse. Her response was dismissive, condescending, and utterly infuriating. "Maybe you shouldn't build your garage so close to the road," she retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I was speechless. My house is 25 feet from the curb, I managed to stammer, incredulous at her blatant disregard for reality. That's well within the setback regulations. Her defense was as absurd as it was insulting. She actually tried to defend the fact that she ran into my garage by saying it was too close to the road. She was out of her mind. The conversation deteriorated from there. She became increasingly defensive, accusing me of being confrontational and suggesting that I was exaggerating the damage. She refused to take responsibility, instead deflecting blame and attempting to gaslight me into believing that I was somehow at fault. Unfortunately, the incidents didn't stop there. In fact, they increased. Soon, it became a weekly occurrence, sometimes even twice a week. I would walk outside to find fresh marks, new dents, evidence of Karen's continued vehicular assault on my property. It felt like she was deliberately targeting my garage, using it as some sort of personal driving range. One particularly egregious incident involved her knocking over my garbage bins. I woke up one morning to find the bins scattered across my lawn, the contents strewn across my yard. When I confronted her about it, she attempted to blame the wind on a perfectly still, windless day. I realized that reasoning with Karen was futile. She was impervious to logic, immune to reason, and completely convinced of her own infallibility. So, I turned to the Homeowners Association, hoping that they could intervene and put an end to her destructive behavior. I filed a formal complaint, providing them with video evidence, photographs, and detailed accounts of each incident. Expected the HOA to take action, to enforce the rules and regulations that were designed to protect homeowners from such nuisances. But my hopes were quickly dashed. The HOA shrugged it off. The reason, Karen, is the HOA. Literally the president. She controlled the board, manipulated the rules, and wielded her power with impunity. She dismissed my complaints as harassment, claiming that I was unfairly targeting her and attempting to undermine her authority. Feeling utterly defeated and increasingly frustrated, I realized that I was on my own. The HOA was a dead end. Karen was unrepentant, and my garage was becoming a casualty of her driving incompetence. I desperately needed a solution, a way to protect my property from her relentless attacks. I went back and forth on ideas, but I had to come up with a solution. I even thought about moving, but I enjoyed the house, and I couldn't let this old hag run me out of my own home. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I decided to outsmart Karen. After the third major dent, the one that truly pushed me over the edge, I decided to devise a plan. I would not let Karen continue to destroy my property. I would make her regret the day she ever decided to target my garage. I decided to build the Guardian. I spent countless hours researching the best materials, studying structural engineering principles, and brainstorming innovative ways to protect my garage without violating any HOA regulations, or at least, without making it too obvious. I knew that I couldn't simply erect a massive concrete barrier. That would undoubtedly attract unwanted attention and raise suspicion. I needed something subtle, something that would appear innocuous but possess the strength and resilience. To withstand Karen's vehicular assaults, I started by pulling out the original blueprints of my house, carefully examining the dimensions and specifications of my garage. Then, I called in a favor from an old friend, a contractor with a knack for creative problem solving. I told him about my predicament, about Karen's relentless attacks, and about my need for a foolproof defense. He listened patiently, nodding occasionally, and then, with a mischievous grin, he said, "I think I have an idea." Together, we designed what I now affectionately call the Guardian. It was a reinforced steel garage frame, the kind they use for commercial loading docks. We chose a high-strength steel, capable of withstanding significant impact without buckling or bending. The secret, however, lay in its internal design. We constructed an internal hydraulic shock-absorbing cage, a network of pistons and cylinders designed to dissipate energy and minimize the force transferred to the garage structure. We lined the cage with pressure sensors, strategically placed, to detect any impact and trigger a series of automated responses. The installation of the Guardian was a delicate operation, requiring careful planning and meticulous execution. We worked under the cover of darkness, using specialized equipment to minimize noise and avoid attracting attention. We were careful to paint the reinforced steel frame the exact same color as my old one, ensuring that it blended seamlessly with the existing structure. The goal was to make it appear as if nothing had changed, to lull Karen into a false sense of security. But behind the seemingly ordinary facade lay a formidable defense system, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. And just to add a touch of, shall we say, poetic justice, I incorporated one final element into the design: high-impact titanium strips. We carefully installed these strips along the entire edge of the reinforced steel frame, ensuring that they were not sharp enough to cause serious injury, but strong enough to leave a lasting impression. The titanium strips were designed to make a solid mark, or maybe a dent, in whatever happened to hit it. The effect that I had planned was now in place thanks to the Guardian. 2 weeks later, the inevitable happened. Karen barreled out of her driveway in her silver Lexus, sipping a latte and looking everywhere except where she was going. She was completely oblivious to her surroundings, lost in her own world of suburban entitlement. She turned too early, like she always does, and bam, the Lexus collided with the Guardian at full angle. The impact was deafening, but this time, the outcome was drastically different. Karen's entire front bumper got ripped halfway off, dangling precariously from the car. The high-impact titanium strips had done their job, leaving a gaping wound in her precious Lexus. Not only that, but my new security system instantly triggered. Sirens blared, spotlights illuminated the scene, and camera floodlights bathed Karen in an unforgiving glare. A pre-recorded voice boomed through the speaker, announcing, "Impact detected. Footage saved. Authorities have been notified." She froze. Her eyes widened in panic, her latte cup clattering to the ground. I walked outside as calm as ever, coffee in hand. I had been expecting this moment, and I was ready. She stumbled out of the car, screaming hysterically. She talked about how I had installed a weapon on my property, how I was deliberately trying to harm her. She threatened to call the police, to sue me, to unleash the full fury of the HOA. I simply gestured towards the security cameras, a sardonic smile playing on my lips. "Go ahead, Karen," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I'd be happy to show them the footage, which not only includes this latest incident, but also the 12 prior times you've grazed, tapped, or clipped my property. All logged, all saved, all time-stamped." I had meticulously documented every single incident, creating a comprehensive record of her destructive behavior. The evidence was irrefutable, the case airtight. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Karen was still yelling, waving her arms wildly when they pulled up. She tried to accuse me of trapping her, of deliberately setting a trap to damage her car. The officers watched the footage, their expressions growing increasingly skeptical. They turned to her and asked, point blank, why she kept driving into my garage like it was some sort of obstacle course. She stuttered, stammered, and blamed the HOA, the one she's about to get kicked out of. I interjected, my voice dripping with satisfaction. It turns out that while Karen was focused on me, other neighbors had been documenting her harassment too. Her reign of terror extended beyond my property, and her behavior had alienated many members of the community. My footage was the final straw, a tipping point that triggered a revolt against her autocratic rule. The HOA board voted that week to remove her as president. Not only that, but she's now personally liable for the repair costs of every homeowner's property she damaged. The evidence was clear, the case overwhelming, and the community had finally had enough. Her insurance company dropped her 2 days later, deeming her a high-risk driver, and me, no more dents, no more drama. Just me, my garage, and the Guardian. The suburban peace I had initially sought had finally been restored, albeit with a touch of engineered vengeance. I now sleep soundly, knowing that my property is protected, and that Karen Whitmore has finally learned a valuable lesson about responsibility, accountability, and the consequences of unchecked power. The best part is, she can't do anything. She ruined her reputation, lost her position, and had to fix all the damages that she had caused.